Welcome back to the Radical Dreamers. We are going through another ending this time, but this time we're falling asleep. Serge, oi Serge, I'm talking to you. My head jerked up as I snapped back to consciousness. Idiot that I was, I'd managed to drift off. As I came back to my senses, I looked up to see the hulking shadow of Lynx's Manor looming over us. Wakey, wakey, sleepyhead, we've got work to do. Her words had hardly reached me before she jumped onto the terrace and disappeared within. Ack, wait up, kid! Flustered, I rushed after her. A corridor stretched off to the left and the right from the terrace. It seemed equally dark and chilly in both directions. Alright, where's our way in? Kid's casual comment settled our nerves. Magil quietly surveyed our surroundings. Meanwhile, I found myself distracted by how cold the sweat on my forehead felt. It was only when I reached to wipe the sweat from my brow and turned my head slightly that I happened to see it. A soft glimmer of light. At least, I thought that's what I saw, a gentle glow coming from a decorative window close to the ceiling. But as much as I strained my eyes to try and catch it again, I couldn't. Oi, Serge, you better not be sleeping on the job. We'll leave you for the guards to find. Kid and Magil were already far down the passageway. How long had I been standing there? We want to go ahead and look again at the window. There was a light. It was faint, vague, like a shrouded star. No, this was no light. It was visible in the darkness, but it was more of a side effect. It was crying out to me through the shadows of night, crying out to be seen, to be noticed. There, draped in a set of ancient robes, floated the figure of a young girl. You've come, at long last. It was a tremulous voice filled with sorrow. I'm still not sure if I really heard it or if it was somehow echoing in my mind. One thing was certain, it wasn't a dream, nor was it an illusion. There was no doubt about what I heard next. It was Kid and Magil making apprehensive noises as they appeared at my side. What the heck was that? It took a few moments, but Kid had soon just about regained her composure. Thaumaturgy, diablerie, necromancy. With enough experience in these practices, eventually one can see the dead. And while it's not exactly something to be proud of, having taken on some very odd jobs indeed, we'd witnessed things that no ordinary person would ever see. And more than a few that no one should ever see, courtesy of Magil's dark arts. Even so, for a moment, the three of us were stunned. If I had to say why, perhaps it was because the seemingly bottomless sorrow of the girl's sigh, the sense of torment even, struck a chord with all of us. Nothing will come of lingering here. Something told me Magil was right. We should leave. It wasn't until later that I realized the ashen tone Kid's face had taken on wasn't just because of the moonlight. Okay, so at this point, a corridor stretched off to the left and the right. We want to go ahead and go left down the corridor. And we want to go left down the corridor until we reach some stairs, and we want to go ahead and continue onward. We continued onward past where the stairs and the side passage emerged into the main corridor. We found ourselves in front of some ornate double doors. Let's go ahead and go inside these. Creak was the noise I expected the doors to make. But instead, they simply swung open silently, as if weightless. We found ourselves in a huge chamber, 2 stories high. It was like a cathedral right down to the enormous pipe organ built into the back wall. The flickering light of countless candles, seemingly engaged in a losing battle with the shadows with their own flames created, gave the room an almost tenuous quality, as if it were only half there. Looks like a church of some kind, but there's something strange about it. It's the shape. Most churches are cross-shaped. It wasn't like Magil to make a comment like that unprompted. Something about the place was bothering him, and not in the same way that it was bothering Kid and me. The layout of this chamber is unusual indeed, and deliberately so, as if whoever built it intended to avoid any suggestion that they might be honoring the gods, or perhaps they were honoring other gods. Magil pondered away to himself like this as he began to examine the room around him. You want to go ahead and investigate. If Magil had noticed something, it was something worth investigating. I walked over to the pipe organ that had caught my attention earlier. How odd. There was an extra key on the keyboard. I did a double take, unsure that my eyes weren't deceiving me, but sure enough, there was one black key too many. Neither Kid nor Magil had taken the time to note this little detail yet. My trained eye picked it out right away. He's a musician, by the way. I cracked my knuckles and you want to try pressing the 2 white keys on either side of the extra key. Clunk. The moment I pressed the keys, a section of the floor next to the organ sank into the ground. A set of stairs led down into the darkness. Hey, Kid. Yeah, we noticed. Kid and Magil were already standing right beside me. The space under the hall was vast as well. Magil conjured up a small light. It wasn't quite bright enough for us to see all the way to the edges, but it was enough to show us the room beneath was about the same size as the chamber above and lined with the same columns. In fact, it seemed a lot like this might have been the floor level of an even more vast original chamber. The ceiling, that is to say the floor of the hall above, appeared to have been built much more recently than the rest of the room. It was as if someone had rushed to put a lid on something that had happened here. Something they didn't want others to find. Over there. Magil was pointing at something. It was some kind of hazy cloud. No, that wasn't quite it. What I thought was a cloud was actually... Oh, I can't read that fast. Is that one of the magic circle thingamajigs? Kid growled suspiciously. Doesn't look like it's been used for yonks. What do you reckon, Mage? It is difficult to know for certain. It would seem so, but it would take some time to investigate enough to know for sure. It certainly seems to be ancient. Well, it ain't going nowhere. Guess we can come back and have a proper look later. We've got the rest of the manor to explore yet. Magil grunted in agreement, but seemed a little disappointed at having to leave his find behind. Nevertheless, he seemed as keen as the rest of us to avoid getting stuck down here for too long. We returned to the main hall upstairs and exited back into the corridor. We left the hall and returned to the corridor. Eventually it led us to an intersection. There were some stairs going down, and to the right, a dark side passage. If we kept going straight on, we'd arrive back at the terrace. We actually want to go down the stairs because we're going to go to Riddell's room first. Slowly, we crept down the staircase, descending deeper into the blackness as we went. At the bottom, the path split. The way to the left continued onto an atrium that resembled a sort of plaza, while the path to the right was a winding passageway that trailed off into the darkness. That's where we want to go. We went down the stairs, then took the passage to our right. Eventually, we came across an ornate door on the right-hand side. That's the door we want to go into to start with. Something smelled fresh and pleasant. Flowers? Was it coming from inside? The room beyond was eerily still. There was a neatly made bed, a sideboard with a row of small wooden animal statues arranged on top, and a single flower in a vase on the table. Signs that someone used to live here. Used to. Everything was buried in a thick layer of dust that blew here and there in the breeze coming in through the shattered window. The items arranged there were nothing but mementos of a long since departed occupant. I don't think we'll be finding much in here, Kid. Let's go. She didn't hear me. She was too busy peering into a chest big enough for her to climb inside. I went over to take a look. In it were a set of pale blue robes. They looked like something a nun might wear. Felicia? Felicia? Kid whispered a name I'd never heard before, and I could only repeat it in puzzlement. It didn't seem that she'd even noticed I was there until I spoke. Never mind, let's go. She frowned and turned on her heel. Alright, so now that we have done that, we actually want to go back upstairs. So let's see here. We want to head back toward the atrium, and then we want to go back up to the stairway. So let's go ahead and we want to take the toward the stairs going back up. And then once we get to the top of the staircase here, we want to go to the we want to head back toward the terrace. We actually want to go past the terrace. After a short walk down the corridor, the terrace came into view, and then we want to go ahead and keep following the corridor. A short way along the corridor, running from the right-hand side of the terrace, we found an ancient-looking door again on our right. Again, we want to continue past this. So let's go ahead and continue on. Now, we've gone ahead and continued on the corridor where we came across a rather sturdy-looking door on our left. This is the one we want to go into. A little further on stood a stairway leading upward. Well, this door is clearly meant to keep something safe. If there ain't some kind of treasure behind it, me name ain't Kid. Yeah, that's the smell of cold, hard cash, all right, she muttered to herself as she began to inspect the door more closely. Let's go ahead and go inside here. It was locked, but not for long. Magil began weaving a ward of unlocking, but Kid beat him to the punch with a swift twist of her hairpin. It seemed almost suspiciously easy. I got the feeling Kid and Magil thought the same thing. We inched into the room, our senses on high alert. We'd hoped we'd find a treasure vault, a hall of miracles stacked to the ceiling with glittering gold coins and jewels, but the sight that greeted us was very different. Which isn't to say there wasn't a treasure or two. There were jewels and precious metals, the kinds of things nobility and the rich like, but they were arranged in a very particular pattern. It was a massive diorama, a seascape rendered in minute detail using priceless treasures. Glittering white crystals formed the crests of waves deep as valleys, which rose in great columns of agate. There was a reef made from jade, glinting with a strange hard light, atop which sat a mermaid of pearl with an enigmatic smile, silver hair, and scales of mica. And amid the waves was a hand clutching at thin air and seemingly about to be swallowed by the water. I couldn't identify what it was made from, but it was stunningly realistic. It was an incredible work of art, the single moment of a great storm, crystallized and preserved forever. But it wasn't beauty that was conveyed to me. Its vividness filled me with an inexplicable dread. And through the scene was composed of countless precious stones. One stood out starkly from the rest. It was the stone the mermaid held, a jewel shaped like a lotus flower and drenched in blood-red light. The frozen flame. We all knew it instantly. We'd found it. Get the ladder out, Serge. I'm going to grab the loot. Having been lured by the siren's call, Kid could hardly contain her excitement. But something held me back. No, it felt like something was almost pushing me back. Whatever it was keeping me from sharing in Kid's sense of gleeful triumph. But I couldn't let my nerves get the better of me. Let's go ahead and do it. I took the pieces of a portable ladder from among my things. They were made from the light and sturdy yet pliable stalks of a plant that grew in the east, which made them perfect for bringing along on little expeditions like this. I tossed out the pieces one by one while Kid and Magil put them together, as they'd done many times before. A few minutes later, we had a ladder long enough to cross the sea of jewels. Kid left the finishing touches to me as she dumped her heavy bag and weapons on the floor. She began to breathe in a strange rhythm, concentrating hard on the task ahead. It was a secret technique she learned somewhere that enabled her to reduce her weight to a fraction of its normal level. She practically floated over to the mermaid, the ladder barely even bending. But her little trick did nothing to stop the trap that was sprung the moment she set foot on the reef. Yeah, as she reached for the frozen flame, webbed fingers lashed out, their talons digging deep into her arm. Bright red blood spurted from the wound. The mermaid's aquamarine eyes remained impassive, but her scales rustled as she began to move. There was an awful creaking sound as cogs within her pearlescent form began to grind against one another. Quicksilver coursed through the clockwork guardian's veins as she whirred into motion, preparing to deal with the intruder who had dared set foot in her domain. At the same moment, the sea of jewels began moving like a real sea, as if the moment frozen in time had suddenly thawed. The crushed crystals that formed the crest of the waves began to beat against Kid mercilessly, as if trying to throw her from the reef, and before we knew it, she'd lost her footing. As I watched her fall, I caught sight of something even stranger. It was the hand I saw earlier, but it wasn't just a hand now. The whole body had been revealed, the whole corpse, I should say. It looked as if the last person who'd set this gruesome mechanism in motion had been trapped there, frozen until such time as another unknowing victim happened along. Kid! She was thrashing helplessly in the raging waves. Was she going to be the next victim of this monstrous machine? We had to do something. We couldn't leave her to die like this. And then the mermaid slipped into the waves, making straight forward. There was a flash of light from Magil's hand, followed by a silver needle, which shot through the air and struck the mindless automaton right in the eye. But the mechanical monstrosity didn't miss a beat. It was just another cog in a bigger machine, one whose sole purpose was to attack, to destroy, but a cog nonetheless. The true heart of this enormous mechanism lay elsewhere. Its jaw dropped open as if suddenly dislocated. Rows of razor-sharp teeth glinted inside, teeth designed to tear flesh. I did my best to remain composed. What was it? Something had been gnawing on me this whole time. I just had to think. But what was it? Of course, the corpse. It wasn't the machine's last victim after all. It was part of the machine. And since it was the only part that wasn't made from precious stones, that meant it was different, important. I was going purely on gut instinct, but I had nothing else to go on. Magil, aim for the corpse. Without another word or a look in my direction, he sent the shockwave spell he was about to cast on the mermaid, sailing straight at the corpse instead. Its head shattered into pieces, the blast tearing into the surrounding water. But there was no blood. The body must have been stewing there for a long time. I didn't have time to dwell on this macabre thought for more than a moment, though, before a dramatic transformation occurred and my mood changed to one of profound relief. It was as if everything we'd just seen was a bad dream. The tempestuous sea and the mermaid were still again. All was motionless and hard as stone. Kid lay on the ground, coughing and spluttering. Her little dunking hadn't done her much good. She was retching violently enough to turn even my stomach. And then I saw it. She was clutching the frozen flame in one hand, clutching it so tightly that it would surely leave a mark. I see. The curse slowly overrides the perception of its victims. Not only does this prevent them from acting effectively, but even if they keep their wits about them, they have no way of knowing which part of the mechanism to aim for. Clever. Magil was poking curiously at the corpse, the only thing that hadn't now transformed back into a mass of jewels. Looking at it made me feel sick. I'd had enough of this horrible scene. Well, we've got what we've come for. Reckon it's time we skedaddled. Kids seemed in no great hurry to stick around either, so we left. Alright, so we have the left and the right, and we want to head back toward the terrace. And then once you continue toward the terrace, we do not want to go in the clock room. We're just going to go ahead and continue on. Something was wrong. Didn't there used to be a terrace here? Kids said what we were all thinking. The moonlight picked out with cold precision a corridor whose flagstones stretched off into endlessness in a manner hard for the human mind to comprehend. Maybe we just forgot how spacious the corridor was here? Yeah, that's probably it. The terrace is probably just a little further on. No, I remember the tree. I memorized its outline to guide us on our way back through the forest, stated Magil flatly, torpedoing my admittedly vain attempt to cling to reason. We all fell silent. We need to continue on here. Back here again, huh? Muttered Kid impatiently. Somehow, even though we tried to continue straight on, we found ourselves confronted with the same tree Magil had pointed out earlier. And of course, there was still no sign of the terrace. What the bloody hell is going on? This doesn't make any sense. I don't bloody like it. This is your bloody fault, Serge, she yelled. My fault? It's not like I have any idea what's going on either. If this mess is anyone's fault, it's yours. I never wanted to come to this stupid manor in the first place. You made me. Interesting. The curse imprisons its victims in an endless corridor, forcing them to wander until their sanity slips away. Devilish trap indeed. I see the walls are also almost imperceptibly distorted. An ordinary person could very well lose their mind here. With that, Magil quickly grabbed me and Kid by the wrists and pushed hard on some kind of pressure point. I realized that I was regaining my grip on the situation. Whatever he'd done, it calmed my mind. And I could see that Kid had regained her composure too. She was looking somewhat sheepishly down at the ground. It would seem that the lord of the manor is not keen to let us leave, muttered Magil. Kid raised her head and looked him dead in the eye. Good, 'cause I ain't going nowhere. Hold tight, Lynxy. We're coming for ya. Bah, still stuck, spat Kid. And she was right. The terrace was nowhere to be seen. Let's go ahead and keep going. We took the corridor leading from the left-hand side of the terrace, eventually arriving at the intersection with some stairs. We want to go down the stairs to start with. Slowly we crept down the staircase, descending deeper into the blackness. And then we don't want to go to the atrium, we want to go ahead and take the passageway. It's going to lead us back to the ornate door on the right-hand side, which we're going to go ahead and continue on our way though. It's funny. Yeah, funny, is it? Then why ain't you laughing? Here, maybe I can help you. Kid, stop it. I'm serious. Whatever, just thought I'd liven up things a little. The tickling stopped and like a light going out, Kid's expression snapped back to its usual resting scowl. So the thing you thought was funny, it's that we ain't seen a living soul since we set foot in this place, right? Even after wandering around for hours? Well, I'm right, ain't I? She looked at me expectantly. I nodded silently, too awestruck at her sudden insight to say a word. Now that I heard it put into words by someone else, the whole thing seemed even stranger. If you seek answers, perhaps you can ask the Lord of the Manor directly. Magil thrust his chin forward, gesturing at a dark mahogany door ahead. Its grandeur was practically an announcement that beyond it lay the Lord of the Manor's chambers. Alright, you ready, boys? Said Kid before pushing the door open. Kid opened the door and slipped quietly into the room. This was Lynx's room. Or at least it had been. Wait, I'm just being confusing. I need to pace myself. It's all flooding back too fast. What I meant to say that it was clearly Lynx's room, but that Lynx wasn't there anymore. Well, he was, but he was dead. He and a knight from some foreign land appeared to have killed each other at the same time. I can't believe this. We would have heard rumors if he'd ended up and died, wouldn't we? I had to agree, but we'd heard nothing of the kind. And how was that possible? Lynx was so well known that anything and everything he did got talked about eventually. If he'd been found dead, there was no way we wouldn't have heard about it. How could his body just have lain here all this time without word getting out? No, wake up, Lynx, you skunk. You've got things to answer for, killing all those people, taking Felicia from me. You can't die without paying for all that. It's not bloody fair. Kid was clearly in shock. We can't be the first people to have found him, can we? Maybe someone did, but they never made it back alive to tell the tale. I almost got the feeling she thought she was lightening the mood by saying this. She wasn't. This was serious, deadly serious. An ominous silence descended. Strange, said Magil finally. We've been eyeing Lynx's body with a cold, almost scientific interest. Yeah, quite the little scene we've happened across, eh? Bet he never saw that coming. Kid tried to make light of the situation, as if to dispel the miasma of fear that had descended. But as always, Magil was less than receptive, and continued to coldly assess the situation. His corpse shows no sign of life whatsoever. No kidding. I had no idea what he was trying to tell us. When a person dies, their mind and their will, what some call their soul, leave the body. Their life essence, however, remains, slowly dissipating as the body breaks down. Well, he doesn't look too fresh to me. You sure it hasn't all leaked out already? Kid seemed to want the conversation to be over as quickly as possible so we could get out of there. It is true that not a single shred of vital essence remains, but this is not normal. Far more strangely, I cannot detect signs of any such essence ever having been present in his body. For every last visage to have vanished is... For once, Magil seemed to be completely at a loss for explanation. Maybe Lynx and the guy he was fighting were vampires? I offered, desperately calling to my woefully inadequate knowledge of the supernatural. I wasn't too keen to find out. We'd seen enough already. A ghostly girl, a mechanical mermaid, and now the lord of an abandoned manor's corpse drained of every last shred of its vital essence. I was as ready to leave as Kid was. But either Magil hadn't noticed or he'd chosen to put his interest in getting to the bottom of the mystery first. No, you were correct that vampirism would explain the lack of vital essence, but vampires retain their souls. And they do not lie still for want of essence. They set out to prowl the night in search of it, or an endless quest for blood. Alright, that's enough of that. So what you're saying is, this corpse has no life or soul in it, yeah? Why do we care exactly? Kid glared at him, demanding an answer, quickly. For once, she and I were of the same mind. Something strange was going on. It wasn't just this room. The whole manor was steeped in something very wrong indeed. Despite being completely empty as far as we'd seen, a presence lurked in every corner. And it was clear, don't ask me how, that this was no ordinary haunting. Listen you, we've got the frozen flame and Lynx is dead. We're done here and we're leaving. You got that? Kid's patience finally got the better of her. Very well, assuming that we're permitted to leave. He was staring at a large mirror embedded in the wall at the back of the room. Kid, you've come. You've finally come. It was the girl again. She wore an expression of unutterable sadness. Something tells me that our friend here wishes us to stay. Kid, you don't know her, do you? Felicia! I'd barely managed to stammer out the question, but it didn't matter. Kid wasn't listening. Her eyes were locked on the girl, an imploring look on her face. Magil stepped closer to the mirror and began to intone a spell. What is it? What do you want from us? He asked. It hurts. It hurts so much. I need your souls. The mirror shattered with an ear-splitting crash. The girl was gone. A blood-curdling scream echoed around the room, but was just as quickly drowned out by an unbearable metallic screeching. That's Lynx's voice, stammered Kid, looking at her right hand in horror. Blood-red light was seeping from her clenched fist. It was as if the frozen flame was sending out tentacles in an attempt to seize her body. I don't know what that says. Magil finished off the spell he'd started casting when he stepped up to the mirror. Gah! Ugh! Bright crimson light filled the room as Lynx's voice twisted with agony. Did you get him, Mage? He was trying his hardest to contain the sorcery that was flying around the room. It looked like every muscle in his body was straining with the effort. No, you fool, this alone won't hold him. Take Kid and get out of here. I looked back and saw that she'd collapsed to the floor, white as a sheet, and yet her hand was still clasped tightly around the frozen flame. I threw her over my shoulder and fled into the corridor. Magil followed, hot on our heels. Kid? Kid! Nah, where am I? She came to, seemingly almost vulnerable for a brief moment. Where do you think we are? 2? Seems you're back to normal? Magil had been holding up 2 fingers as he spoke, and Kid had completely ignored his actual question and counted them instead. The unspoken understanding they shared was beyond me. It still is. And as an aside, the actual answer to Magil's question was the corridor on the first floor near the terrace we can't get to. He suggested that we head back toward the magic circle we'd found earlier, as Kid had regained her composure. Okay, so let's go do that. The magic circle resembles something I once saw long ago, muttered Magil under his breath, along with something about finding a way. And what if you can't find a way? Asked Kid casually, as if she'd never lost consciousness at all. I was relieved that she seemed to be okay. More than okay, in fact. Chipper, even. Then I fear we will spend the rest of our lives in this manner. Well, that sucks. Fortunately, without food, the rest of our lives will only be about a week. That didn't exactly fill me with relief. On another topic entirely, he then launched out of nowhere into some protracted pondering about the fact that the robes that ghostly girl had been wearing were very distinctive. If I didn't know better, I'd have sworn he'd noticed that he'd brought the mood down and then changed the subject to try and cheer me up. They're nuns' robes from the Temple of the Four. Kid's mood, however, seemed to have darkened the moment the girl was mentioned. Oh yeah, isn't that where you grew up? Magil had told me about it a while back. Apparently, a nun from the Temple of the Four had taken in Kid and some other abandoned children. The woman had a similar childhood herself, and Kid had grown very attached to her as a result. But when Kid was still quite young, the lord of that region, Lynx, had summoned the nun to his manor, and she never returned. Soon afterward, she had snuck out of the temple and tried to make her way to Lynx's manor to find her friend. But she was still only a child and couldn't make it far. She returned home to find the temple in that village that surrounded it in ruins and everybody dead. Luckily for her, Magil was a frequent visitor to the temple and arrived not long after. He found Kid surrounded by bodies that had already shriveled and dried up like mummies. There she sat, silently, glaring in the direction of Lynx's manor, her lips tightly sealed. And they stayed sealed. It was years before Kid spoke again, and according to Magil, she hadn't shed a single tear since. Here goes. Kid's voice snapped me back into the moment. Her hand was on the door, ready to push it open. I hadn't realized that we were already back at the Great Chamber. This time, the door made the eerie noise I had first expected as it swung open, scraping on my already taut nerves. We headed straight for the pipe organ. I pressed the same keys on the keyboard as before. For a moment, I thought the contraption might not work a second time. But I needn't have worried. The stairs to the hall below appeared just as they had last time. But this time, the place they led us to looked very different. Before, it had been too dark to see. This time, it was as bright as day. Someone's there. Welcoming committee, huh? Just what we need. The tension was visible on Kid and Magil's faces. Mine, on the other hand, probably looked outright terrified. Well, can't keep 'em waiting. Kid spurred us back into motion. We had no choice but to press on. It was completely different down there from how it had been before. The room was filled with light. The presence we had felt before was alive now, and a swirling spectral energy filled the room. In response, the outline of the magic circle on the floor pulsed with a powerful garnet red light, welcoming our arrival with an almost palpable sense of glee. Under less ominous circumstances, one might have even described the scene as beautiful, if one had been prepared to ignore the very disturbing sight at the center of it. There, in the middle of the storm, we saw him. Lynx. It gave an unconscious growl, teeth clenched behind her perfect pink lips. I'd never laid eyes on him before, but I knew it was him from the moment I saw him. This was, without a doubt, the form that Solo desiccated corpse had taken in life. This was the man behind it all, and we were finally face to face with him. Grrr. This time, Kid's growl was stronger, more deliberate. She seemed almost scared before, but every trace of fear had vanished. Now it was hatred that governed her, overriding all other emotions. I wondered if she might even be feeling some kind of mad delight, a perverse, insane glee at finally getting her chance for revenge. For his part, despite being faced with his mortal foe, assuming he shared Kid's sense of enmity, Lynx spoke in a calm, soft voice, almost as gentle as a whisper. Return the frozen flame to me if you would be so kind. You are carrying my very soul. You think I'm just gonna hand it over because you asked nicely? Why would I go through all the trouble of nicking it if I was gonna give it up that easily? Kid's visible agitation stood in stark contrast to Lynx's cold composure. She had taken the frozen flame from her pocket and was gripping it tightly in her hand. Crimson light blazed from between her fingers. What happened to you anyway? What the hell is going on with your mansion? He answered almost sorrowfully. I am, as I'm sure you've seen, my physical body perished in a scuffle with an assassin. Thankfully, by employing ancient rite, I was able to preserve my soul in the form of a jewel. Alas, the price I paid was to take on a form incapable of traveling beyond the confines of this magic circle. My powers are lost to me. Please, at least return my soul. Alas, indeed, Lynxy boy, but if you think I'm going to take pity on you after everything you've done, you're nuts as evil. Kid's almond eyes narrowed and her voice quivered with rage. You think dying once is enough to pay for your crimes? Your suffering's only just beginning. Kid pulled the arm holding the frozen flame back like an archer prepared to loose an arrow. No one's ever gonna pity you, you bastard. You don't deserve pity. She twisted, throwing all her strength into a huge swing, and brought the jewel hurtling down toward the unyielding stone floor. Wait! Kid, no! She froze where she stood. Another voice had joined Magil's as he cried out. Gah, you little wretch! Lynx seemed to warp and bend, and another figure appeared in his place. It was the girl. The same girl who had gazed at us so pleadingly from the window when we first entered the manor. Kid, smashing the jewel, losing yourself in your rage. It's exactly what Lynx wants. If you lose yourself entirely, he will consume your soul, just as he did mine. You will become another stepping stone on his road to resurrection. Kid, the circle. I know now where I've seen it before. It's a soul hex. It consumes the souls of any with whom it comes into contact and uses them to break the ties that bind an imprisoned spirit, restoring it to life. Magil, usually so calm and collected, couldn't quite keep the horror out of his voice. Consuming souls? Suddenly, it all came together in my mind. The fact that the manor was deserted, that once we'd grabbed the frozen flame, we'd been unable to leave, that the ghost we'd encountered had fled in fear of being consumed by it, and that it had been so easy to acquire the jewel in the first place. It could only mean the entire manor was a trap. We'd been lured in. Thanks for letting me read that. Felicia, just as I was coming back to my realization, a voice spoke the name, a name I'd heard before. Felicia, I came for you. I finally made it. It was Kid. I'd never heard Kid speak so plaintively before. She sounded almost like a child calling out to her mother. And then I remembered who Felicia was. She was the nun who'd looked after Kid, the only person she'd ever been close to. Sister Felicia. Felicia, oh Kid, sweet little Kid, how you've grown. Oh gosh, wretch! Lynx's face, contorted with agony, emerged from Felicia's chest and then disappeared again. I'm grateful you came for me, Kid, but I cannot come home. You must flee this place while I can still contain him. No, I won't leave you here. I finally found you. You have to come home. You have to. You were always a willful one. A gentle smile crossed Felicia's face for a moment. But I cannot leave. I must atone for my father's sins. Father? He knew that they were coming from him, that his life was in danger, so he made certain preparations. She was struggling to speak. Her efforts to overcome Lynx's control were truly testing her. He conjured up the hex you see before you, a curse that consumes the souls of others in order that a departed soul can be returned to life. But in order to create it, he needed the soul of a blood relative, his daughter. Forgive me, I could not tell you. I could not tell anyone. This monster was my father. I was born out of wedlock to a woman of no standing, but he was my father nonetheless. Kid's eyes opened wide with shock. The moment the assassin slew him, his soul consumed mine in order to trigger the creation of the frozen flame, which set about consuming the souls of everyone in the manor. But even this harvest of souls would not suffice to bring him back. Soon he had consumed those of all in his domain. And yet he still hungered. Still, this was not enough to bring about his resurrection. So he decided to use the jewel that contained his soul as a lure to bring unsuspecting thieves to the manor. I must atone for my part in those terrible crimes. Kid didn't say a word. There was nothing she could say, and neither could I. I barely had the strength left to contain him. You must leave this place, dear sweet little kid. My little girl. Felicia, Lynx still lacks the souls he needs to complete his resurrection, correct? Magel's booming voice broke the silence. I turned to see that he had been working on, I guess you'd call it rewriting part of the magic circle? Felicia gave him a questioning look for a moment, which then gave way to a strangely peaceful smile. Thank you, Magil. It seems I am indebted to you once more. For the first time since I'd known him, I saw him smile. Perhaps. But we'll meet again one day, many years from now, if I'm lucky. You can repay me then. Now then, Serge! Having come to feel like something of a fifth wheel by this point, I jumped with surprise at hearing my name. I'm going to force the soul hex into action. We'll force Lynx's soul back into his body, as ill-prepared and decaying as it is. Serge, I need you to... You can't do this. If we go through this, Felicia's gonna... Kid had suddenly come to. I'll need you to keep Kid away so that she doesn't interfere. I don't quite remember what happened next. There was the shine of a magic circle's light and swiftly swallowed scream from Lynx, Magil's towering flame making sigils in the air, Felicia's smile, and Kid's tears. When I came to, I was laying on the floor holding Kid. Her eyes were red from crying. Our clothes were torn in places and we were both covered in cuts and scratches. Magil was unconscious on the other side of the room, his energy completely spent. And on the floor, there was nothing, not even a trace left. Eventually, the moon rose again and I stayed sitting on the floor, my mind blank, until Magil and Kid finally returned to consciousness. I guess there was nothing else we could do in the end. I didn't say it to anyone in particular, and sure enough, neither of them replied. As we walked side by side through the forest, I turned back for one last look. This time, there was a gentle, quiet surrounding the manor. True peace at last. The frozen flame, which Kid had held onto so tightly, vanished, leaving only an imprint in her hand. And so ends another tale. Perhaps one day I'll see Kid, Magil, and Felicia again. One day, somewhere, at another time, in another world. Perhaps none of us will even realize it, but that's a story for another day. For now, I must put down my pen. And it's Homecoming, Felicia's Light. So I guess I'll see you for the next two endings.